Right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Get in. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jo Holmes. I work for an organisation called Genie, which is greening the economy of the northeast of England. We have funding through Gateshead Council to run some webinars to help organisations of all sizes across Gateshead green the economy, but basically learn how the climate crisis can affect and will affect their businesses going forward and what they can do about it and what all the issues are. So yesterday we covered quite a depressing run through of what the climate crisis involves and why it's so urgent that we all do something, quite a lot, but all do something now. And today we're going to look at carbon footprinting with our partner SmartCarbon, who we work really heavily with. If ever we get anybody who's got even a slightly more complicated carbon footprint that doesn't require just a simple spreadsheet, we always refer them on to SmartCarbon. So this is our second webinar in our series. We've got another 3 to go, and we're hoping to have all the recordings available. You can also book one-to-one support, so you can get a 30-minute or an hour appointment, and that allows you to talk about your unique organisation, what your needs are. It could be a little training session for your management team. We can really fit it with whatever would suit your organisation the best. Genie delivers Investors in the Environment throughout the northeast of England. Investors in the Environment is a brilliant environmental management tool and accreditation system. It's a nationally recognised accreditation system. There are others available, but the thing with Investors in the Environment is it's really adaptable to any size of organisation. So, for example, we've got micro organisations going through it at the minute who are in managed workspaces and there's with a few employees, and we've got up to local authorities. Newcastle NHS Trust has just joined to be accredited as well. So it's really adaptable, and unlike other accreditation systems, it meets your organisation's needs. So it's not about ticking boxes, filling in and creating a big file that sits on a shelf and gets dusty. It's about how it can work for your organisation to reduce your environmental impacts, and generally that means saving money along the way. And you can use it to prove to your suppliers, customers, that you are doing what you can for the environment. It also helps if you're going for any funding or financial support from any banks. They're all starting to look for environmental management because it shows that you're managing your risk. And also with climate change and climate adaptation, that you're looking forward, you're seeing what's coming, and you're managing your risks. So as I said, we work really closely with SmartCarbon. We think they're fantastic, and we refer all our larger companies and anybody with a bit more of a complex carbon footprinting issue. We always refer them to SmartCarbon because they are the experts in the field, and they've got a fantastic platform that you can use. But Lee's going to tell you more about this, and he's here today because he's going to talk us through what a carbon footprint is in the first place and how you can measure your companies. So over to you, Lee.
Thanks, Jo.
If I stop sharing,
I think
I'm almost good at this tech.
Should be on my slides now. Yeah. We can see this. So I think it's just before I start, so that I make sure I kind of, I guess, tailor this accordingly. Maybe if you just find out from the people on the call what type of business they're in and whether you measure your carbon footprint at the moment, that would be just helpful in terms of me being able to put this into context for you.
So we've got we're a containment company, so we've mainly got an office and a big warehouse, and I don't think at the minute we do measure our carbon footprint at all.
Okay, Thank you. Thanks. That's Emily, is it? Okay.
No, that's Alice.
Alice. Thanks, Alice.
Yes.
I can't see the names don't come up once I'm on sharing screen. Okay.
That's okay. That's okay.
Thanks. Yeah. And have we got? Is it?
I work with Alice at CMC, but we've also got First Fix Plastics. Sorry, I've been at the dentist this morning. First Fix Plastics, who's again a warehouse with an office.
Right.
And again, no carbon footprints measured.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And First Light.
Yeah, part of First Fix. Yeah, it's in the same warehouse. So they share space.
Interesting. Okay, we'll come on. We'll contact. So I think what will happen is I'm going to go through the basics of carbon footprinting and reporting, and then this will undoubtedly, I think, raise quite a few questions. And please let's there's not that many of us on the call, so let's just come forward with the questions as they come up. We'll have plenty of time for that. So, okay. So first of all, who am I? Lee Jackson. I'm commercial director with SmartCarbon. We work, as Joe said, we work really closely with Jeannie in helping to provide more extensive carbon footprinting support. And I'll come on to the kind of courses, consultancy, and the platform in a moment. From my own personal perspective, I've been engaged in this kind of sector for the last 3 to 4 years. I'm co-founder of a group called Climate Action for Corporate Travel Urgent Sustainability. So that was about getting people in an industry that I was formerly in, corporate travel and corporate travel payments, to do more to cut back on their emissions. I'm a community trainer for Cumbria Action for Sustainability. So Cumbria has a plan to be carbon neutral by 2037. And so I'm kind of engaged in that. And then I'm an associate member of IEMA as well. So in terms of SmartCarbon and what we do, and there are 3 areas of activity. The first is we help organisations to step into the kind of carbon reporting world by committing to it through some training that we do. I'll reference this at the end of this presentation, but we run a course through Northumbria University called the Carbon Champion, and then that gives you more extensive knowledge than we're going to cover here on greenhouse gas accounting and how you go about it, and that's certified through IEMA, so it's accredited by IEMA, and you get that certificate when you've done it. And that's how I became introduced to SmartCarbon. I did that course a few years ago. The second thing that we do, and we'll be kind of referencing in these slides, is that we provide a software tool that helps you to calculate your emissions and then produce a report, so that you've got that and you can provide it to your customers, you can provide it to your suppliers, you can provide it to the regulators, so that you can show what your actual emissions look like, and that's what we're going to be covering on this in this session. And then finally, we're engaged with organisations to actually help them act, because of course the whole point of calculating and reporting is so that we know where our emissions are coming from and what we can do about them, and therefore we provide consultancy support and quite often in conjunction with Joe and Jeannie to help people look at where they can make a difference and reduce their overall activities. So now this slide is going to kind of be a reminder slide for I know, Alice, you were on the call earlier this week, but it's a good starting point in terms of your carbon footprint, and it's a reminder of what is it that we're looking to measure. So ultimately, what we're measuring is the amount of greenhouse gases, the problem that we have, which we covered on the climate crisis call a couple of days ago is that we are putting more and more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and we're reducing the extent, if you like, of the blanket we have in the atmosphere that keeps us warm, and it's making us too warm. And therefore, what are we doing that's actually causing that to happen? And predominantly, we are taking energy sources that we discovered a couple of hundred years ago out of the ground and from below the ocean, and then we're using that to power the kind of industrialized and societal activities that we've become used to. And so anything that you do which involves use of those energy sources is going to be creating emissions, and those emissions are what we need to record. For the people on this call, how is that going to translate? Well, if you think about the use of coal and gas to create electricity, then clearly electricity is going to be one of those. The emissions that are involved in creating that electricity is one of the things that we're going to need to record. Equally, you're going to be using energy to power industrial processes. In your case, it might be powering warehousing processes. So we're going to need to record that activity. There are wider societal activities going on here, which affect your own personal carbon footprint in terms of your diet and therefore how we use land. But that's going to be less relevant from a business perspective. But certainly one which will be absolutely relevant, of course, is transportation. How you get to work, how you travel around for work is going to be utilising fossil fuels, in particular oil. And therefore we're going to need to record that. And one thing that's interesting, and we're going to come on to in a moment, is that, of course, everyone is becoming increasingly focused on recycling, and how can we minimise our the extent to which we throw stuff into landfill. That will play a part in your emissions reporting and your carbon footprint, but a very small one, as we'll come on to. Predominantly, it's going to be about your use of energy through your processes and through transportation. So we covered. We had this slide up a couple of days ago, but worth looking at again. So these are the emissions globally, and 73% of it is basically coming out of energy use. And the reason that I pointed to the landfill is if you look at the emissions that come out of putting waste into landfill, it's 1.9% globally, and that will play out to similar levels of materiality here in the UK. Therefore, in terms of measuring what you do, it shows the importance really in terms of creating your business carbon footprint is going to be predominantly around energy use. And then as you break that down, it will then be broken into how you warm your buildings, how you light your buildings, how you transport yourselves, and then some of the industrial processes that you undertake. So what is a carbon footprint? So does someone want to hazard I was going to say a guess, that does someone want to offer a description of a carbon footprint? What is a carbon footprint? Obviously, we've got the answer that we've written here earlier, so don't worry, I'm not going to sit here for 10 minutes and wait for you. But if someone wants to, got someone an idea, what's in a carbon footprint? What's in it?
Is it the amount of energy, etc., that you use as you go about your business from day to day?
It is. energy sits behind it, Emily. So that's true. So let's just come on. So ultimately, what we've just looked at is it's energy use, which is then driving the emissions, those greenhouse gas emissions that are going into the atmosphere and causing the warming effect, which in turn is causing climate change. And so what we're actually measuring, although energy is part of it, we've just seen there 73% of it, what we're actually measuring is the total set of greenhouse gas emissions which are caused directly and indirectly by an individual, an event, an organization, or a product expressed as what we call CO2 equivalent, which we're going to come on to in a moment. But I'm just going to cover these four individual points. So this is as defined by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is the most widely used methodology for reporting a carbon footprint. So and that can be measured by, so you could undertake, you could utilize something like the WWF calculator, the paw print calculator. If you look at pawprint.eco, you can measure your own carbon footprint as an individual. So the activities that you undertake, what greenhouse gases are you causing through your lifestyle, through what you do directly and indirectly. So you can measure it as an individual. You can measure it, and we're helping some organizations do that. So for instance, you'll see people recording things like, an event like Glastonbury. What does that create in terms of greenhouse gas emissions from that activity? And of course, what we're talking about here is measuring the greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by your organization through the business activities that you undertake. And your carbon footprint is what do you cause directly through your activities, and what do you cause indirectly, which we'll come on to. And then there's a further measurement that is increasingly relevant, which is what are the greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by a product. So you might measure, I'm looking at my laptop here, what are the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by the production and use of that particular product. But we're focusing now on the emissions and the carbon footprint of you as an organization. So some important, this is probably the most comprehensive slide that we'll be kind of talking through. So there are emission scopes, which we'll come on to in a moment. But let's first of all remember that we're not, although we talk about a carbon footprint, we're actually talking about greenhouse gases in total. And as we covered on the call a couple of days ago, there are other greenhouse gases which are more powerful than carbon dioxide in terms of their ability to retain heat. So we've got carbon dioxide, which is what we base all the measurement, but that's the base figure, if you like. Then we've got methane, and methane is roughly 30 times as powerful as carbon dioxide in its ability to retain heat. And then we've got nitrous oxide emissions, which is almost 300 times as powerful as carbon dioxide. And then we've got things like hydrofluorocarbons, purofluorocarbons, and sulfur fluoroxide, which are thousands of times more powerful, and they vary by the individual gases, but in general they are thousands of times more powerful than carbon dioxide at retaining heat. And of course, the problem that we have is we've got all of these in the atmosphere, and that's what's causing the increase in heat. So in other words, when we talk about a carbon footprint and measuring our emissions, we're talking about measuring all of these. Now, thankfully, the extent to which you are emitting these 5 is going to be much, much less than you're emitting carbon dioxide. It will be predominantly carbon dioxide, but given how much more powerful they are, you've got to include these as well. And we'll come on to where they're prevalent. So in measuring your carbon footprint, you will see the term CO2e, and CO2 is carbon dioxide equivalent. So it's taking into account these gases as well. The next piece and this is really important to understand. So in reporting your emissions, you're obliged to report. If you're going to produce a carbon emissions report, then you've got to include your direct emissions, the emissions that you're responsible for. And that is what we call Scope 1 and Scope 2. And let me explain the difference between the two. So first of all, Scope 1 are the emissions that you're directly responsible for. So in other words, the activities that you're undertaking in your business. If you imagine the tailpipe on a car, when you go and start your car up, if it's diesel or petrol, you'll see the emissions coming from the exhaust. So in other words, you're directly responsible for that, and those emissions are coming out of that piece of equipment, or whether it's a car or a building, they're coming from that particular asset right there and then where you are. And so generally speaking, if you think about your buildings, that's going to be a gas flume that the emissions could be coming out of. If you're powering your building by burning oil, then that will be coming out there. Or if you're burning wood or biofuel, then it will be coming out of a chimney. And equally, if you have company vehicles or external generators of some kind, then those emissions will be coming out of the tailpipe of those assets. So the best way to remember Scope 1 is these are assets where the emissions are directly coming from that piece of equipment or building as you're using it. So you've got to report those things. The second area of direct emissions is basically electricity. So Scope 2 is electricity, which you're directly responsible for, but the emissions are indirect. And by that, what we mean is the emissions that are created through the creation of electricity are happening at the point of the power station. So you're directly responsible for using the energy, but actually the emissions don't happen at your building or in your car. They're happening at the production point of electricity. And you're obliged to report both those areas, Scope 1 and Scope 2, because that's what and if everybody reports those, then we've got cumulatively, we've got all of the emissions in the country, in the world being reported, because that's where it's all happening. So Scope 3, and this is becoming increasingly relevant and probably to a degree a little bit more confusing than it needs to be. Because if you think about your business activities and you say, well, we can report Scope 1 and we report Scope 2, and for some businesses that will actually represent the majority of emissions that represents what they do. But in many cases, it doesn't. Because if you imagine SmartCarbon is a we provide consultancy. If that consultancy was for a bunch of clients in the USA, and most of our activity required us to fly across the Atlantic to visit those clients, we might have a small office in the northeast in Newcastle with hardly any emissions that we would in our Scope 1 and 2 reporting. But actually, most of our activity, most of the emissions we're undertaking are because we're putting people on airplanes flying across the Atlantic to serve those clients. Now, the airline will report those emissions as their scope 1 and scope 2, as they should. That's all fine. But what we've got to remember here when we're producing that carbon footprint is we are measuring what our business is truly responsible for in creating in terms of emissions. And if you take that last example, if we were a consultancy that was mainly involved in sending people worldwide to provide our services, scope 1 and the direct emissions would be relatively small, but actually we need to hold ourselves accountable for how many people we're putting on aeroplanes, because that's truly what we're doing as a business. And that's the way to remember this in terms of your reporting. So you're going to have scope 1, which will be predominantly energy, and you're going to have scope 2, which will be your electricity, and then you're going to have other activities within scope 3, which will either be what we call upstream activities, so creating the service, and then downstream activities in delivering the service to your customers. So as examples within scope 3, you've got, we talked about business travel. Doesn't just have to be on an aeroplane. That could be people traveling in their own car and claiming mileage from you. That's typically business travel activity that we see recorded. It might be people traveling on the train for business meetings, all of which, that transportation creates emissions. You can choose, if you wish, to record the emissions in people getting to their place of work. So employee commuting, clearly if they didn't work for you, then they wouldn't have to undertake that activity. And if you've got thousands of people traveling 10 or 20 miles into your location with diesel vehicles, then that's going to be quite a bit of emissions caused through activity. You may lease out some assets to people. It could be buildings that you lease out to people, and therefore ultimately you take responsibility for the emissions from those activities. We talked about waste, so that will generate generally a small amount of emissions. Transportation of the goods that you use. We've got fuel and energy related activities on here. That's because there may be some activities that you undertake, and a good example here is that you may have you may store a lot of data on external servers, and of course that doesn't come under your electricity, that's under someone else's, and so those energy related activities you can choose to report because you recognize they're part of what you do. You're buying goods that have generated emissions, created emissions in their creation, whether that's capital goods or purchased goods and services. So you can record all of those things, and then equally, if you're transporting and distributing goods to your customers, then you can measure that. The processing of products that you've sold in getting them to the customer, and then again, this is how far you decide to go as an organization, and it may or may not be relevant to you, but if you take this laptop that I've just used as an example, Hewlett-Packard undertook a review of where the emissions are from their product, and the majority of emissions were actually created through the use of the product, the electricity in using the product. And so they put a lot of effort into making their laptops more energy efficient. And so you can choose if you wish to measure this, but this is getting, and then how is the product disposed of at the end of its life. So I think predominantly for the purpose of this session, in measuring your carbon footprint, what you're going to do is you're going to be looking at the energy use in scope 1. You're going to looking at the electricity use in scope 2, and then you're going to select a number predominantly of upstream activities that you choose to record as well, because they're relevant to your business. Any questions so far? Just give a little bit of time. See if there's anything come up. Nothing's come up on chat. Joe should have said, by all means, ask a question in chat if you want to as well. Okay. One of the things so let's say you decide to, and I'm using our platform as a guide here in terms of how you would go about creating a carbon footprint report. So, you know, there are a number of kind of platforms out there. There's the government's factors are available through the government website, so you can get all of their emissions factors on there, and if you like, do it in Excel if you want to do it that way. But I'm going to use our platform just to guide you through what you would do. So first of all, in terms of your report, you're going to want to set up your company first of all. So if you have, now this can be very uncomplicated, depends on the structure of your organisation. It might be simply be you've got your organisation, then you've got a number of officers, departments that you're going to report on. So on one side you've got you're going to report on all the buildings where that are producing emissions for your organisation. On the other side, you're going to decide what period you're going to report for. Now, this needs to be an annual period, and ideally, it should sit alongside the reporting period that you've set for your financial reporting for your accounts. And that means then you can easily slot this information into your annual reports. And what we generally do is we encourage people to create an organisation chart so that they can work out what emissions they're going to want to report on for the various buildings or departments. So depending how big your organisation is, you might not have this level of hierarchy. It might just be down to you. Let's say you've got a company. From what you've just described so far, you've got your company, and then you've got building A, which might be your offices, and then you've got building B, which might be your warehouse. And then under each location, you then need to work out, right, what are the emissions that we need to report in scope 1? So the question to ask, in our head office, do we use any gas? Do we have any air conditioning? Because those really powerful hydrofluorocarbons are so much more powerful, and if you have any leakage in that air conditioning through your service records, then you need to record those as well. Have we got any company vehicles that we own that we need to report on? And if so, they will come under that location. Now, one of the things that you might want to do, if you've got 2 buildings, as was mentioned earlier, if you've got 2 buildings, you might want to just set up a separate department, because you don't actually record your car use under a particular building. So you might want to set up the report so that you've got your office, your warehouse, and then a kind of rest of the organization as a department, so that you can record that activity using your company vehicles. So you've got scope 1 mapped, scope 2, so probably in both your head office location and in your warehouse, you're going to be recording your electricity. And then you'll decide for each location, what are we going to volunteer to report as well. And so in this example here, this particular head office is saying, well, under scope 3, we're going to record our water usage, and we're going to record our waste usage for that location. And then for the rest of the organisation, because we don't record these things by individual building, we've chosen to record our business travel, our employee commuting, and the extent to which we work from home. Makes sense? and then utilizing whether it's our platform or whether it's someone else's, or whether you're using the government spreadsheet, you'll then need to select all of those emission sources into your report so that you can record that particular activity. So if you have company vehicles, for instance, you'll then want to record the diesel usage, and you record what vehicles you have. And you can either, as far as vehicles concerned, you can either record it by mileage or by the actual fuel use, and you select all those sources through either ours or another platform. And then once you've determined everything that you're going to report, all the emission sources, you then need to get the data. And so, make this really simple, what we're talking about is you've identified gas, electric, let's say some air conditioning in your building, and then you've identified some company vehicles that you've got to record the mileage or the fuel for. You'll then go about finding either the meter readings or the bills or the mileage reports from expense reports, and you'll pull all of that information together, and then you will record it. And you can either record it for the entire year. We encourage our clients to try and break that down and record it by, if they've got monthly bills, then record it on a monthly basis. And what you're going to find is when you first create this report, could be with Joe's help or our help, when you create that first report, you've got quite an extensive data entry exercise. You're going to go out and find all of your bills, all of your expense reports, and you're going to put that information into this platform or into a spreadsheet to pull together your report. But thereafter, as you start to do this for future years, you can do that on a monthly basis. You can put processes in place so that you're capturing all the information, and that you've got that going forward, and it becomes much easier. And then with a platform such as our own, then you start to understand within that report, well, actually, what is it that we do that is creating the emissions? And so this is just an example here from a demo site that we have, that you'll know whether, how they split across the scopes, and then how they fall in terms of where are they all coming from. And the biggest one here, as you can see, is from electricity for this particular organization, and that then allows you to be able to do something about it in putting plans in place. And you'll then create a report which you'll then be able to put into your company accounts. And so I don't know how well you can read this, but the report, as I mentioned earlier, you're obliged to report scopes 1 and 2, which is what you're directly responsible for. And so the example here is showing you've got basically 5 million kilograms of CO2 equivalent for this year, 2018 to 19, for scopes 1 and 2, and then that's summarized into the tons of CO2 equivalent, which is what you're reporting against. One of the things that's a good idea when you produce these reports is to have what we call an intensity metric, and that means it kind of normalizes the information so that your customers, your employees have an idea what that means in terms of the organization. So there's 2 examples we've got here. One is, well, that's 7 tons of CO2 per year in direct emissions per full-time employee. So that could mean something for the employees of the business, or you could put an intensity metric of per £1 million of turnover, how much CO2 equivalent you're responsible for. Or there might be a different intensity metric. In education, people want to record it for each student. In the NHS, it could be each patient, and whatever's relevant for your business. And then if you've recorded scope 3, which increasingly now most organisations are doing, whatever scope 3 emissions you've decided to record, then you include that on your report. And in order to be compliant, you want to include all the various lines of emissions and what they are in terms of the overall emissions. Some guidance here from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So when you're pulling together that report, there are 5 areas that you need to abide by. So the report that you produce needs to be relevant to your business. And if you think of that example that I gave you earlier, if we only reported on scopes 1 and 2 and we were flying people all over the world, then it wouldn't really reflect the emissions of our activity and our company. So it's got to be relevant for what you do in terms of what you're including. And it's got to be complete. So, you know, it needs to, you know, you can't pull together a report that says, well, it's going to be difficult to pull together our information for the head office rather than the warehouse, or actually the warehouse might be more difficult because it's shared with someone else. If you're going to create that report, then you've got to address that. It's got to be complete, and therefore, even with some estimations, you're going to need to account for that area of the warehouse that you use. So it's got to be complete. You've got to be consistent use a consistent methodology across all of that accounting. So if you've decided to adopt what we call an operational control methodology, which is what's used predominantly here in the UK, that means that you're going to report on where you have control of the building, not whether you own it or not. And so therefore that methodology has to be consistent. So if you're reporting on a building and you're saying we're reporting not based on whether we own a building, we're reporting based on whether we have operational control of it. You know, we turn the lights on, we're there, then you apply that across all of the buildings. And so you've got to be consistent in across all areas, and you've got to be transparent. And if there's any issues, then you report them, and you're really clear about that. And wherever possible, a clear audit trail. Certainly on our platform, you can attach all of the bills, all the workings out, so that you can be really clear on the calculations that you've used. And you need to be as accurate as you possibly can. And again, coming back to this balance with transparency, where you've had to put estimations in place, then you can be really transparent about the calculations that you've made to do that. And if you're sharing the warehouse, then clearly there's going to be some level of estimations that, unless you've got a separate meter for your area in that warehouse. And within our own report, we give some suggestions in terms of being transparent. So you as part of the report, you share what energy efficiency measures you've taken, what you've got planned in the future. You can talk about the methodology that you've and we help you with this, the methodology that you've applied, and then provide details of any estimations that you've had to make. And if there are some small levels, I mean, you may say that, you know, this year we haven't included the employee commute because we had no real data on it, but we intend to include it in following years. And so these exclusions would be around scope 3 emissions, because of course scope 1 and scope 2 are mandatory. I've included this. One of the things we can do is you can include emissions that, as you move on in your reporting, you can include the emissions that come from your supply chain. So you may have a whole bunch of suppliers that make up a good part of your overall emissions. And so one of the things we can do from a SmartCarbon perspective is help you to feed those in through a supply chain dashboard we can create for your suppliers. I'm not going to spend much time on that. I just wanted to mention that we do that. And then equally, if you want further training, we provide a full day or 2 half-day sessions on covering all of this kind of material in detail. But hopefully that has given you I guess an introduction to what's included in a carbon footprint, and how you go about reporting it. We've not had any questions so far, but maybe there are some now. Judy. You're on mute, Judy. How far back do you need to go? So that is kind of your choice, because if the fact that you've not been reporting so far suggests that you're not captured by streamlined energy and carbon reporting regulations, and therefore if you're not, then you're reporting on a voluntary basis, and therefore you decide.
Can you remind us of what those thresholds are?
We can. You've got to have a turnover of 36 million or more, a balance sheet of 18 million or more, or 250 or more employees. And if you've got 2 of those 3, then you fall into what we call SECA reporting regime. But if you don't, then so in other words, Judy, you're reporting on a voluntary basis. You're reporting because you want to. So then what you need to do is you want to put in place an initial report, a baseline report, and consider the fact that ideally what you then want to have in place is a plan to reduce your emissions from that particular year. Now, what we find at the moment, because of the pandemic, is that if you know your business operations were significantly altered by the pandemic, the question you've got to ask yourself is, if I report this year's emissions as my baseline, has that been particularly influenced by the pandemic, and therefore there's going to be a spike because we're going to start doing stuff that we've not been doing for the last couple of years. And so most of the people we are working with over the last year that are doing this for the first time have reported their pre-pandemic emissions, and that would be 2019-20.
But you could start this next financial year, because you're doing it voluntarily, and you could do next year. You could start going through and do if you wanted to.
Yeah,
it's entirely up to you. Emily?
Yes, first of all, I missed out on telling you who I am. I'm here representing Gateshead Football Club Foundation. We actually don't have our own place. We rent the Gateshead International Stadium, but I've made a note of all of the things we do. I've got quite a long list, because obviously it's not just use of the building. I mean, one thing that leapt out at me when you said lighting, I was thinking of floodlights, because they're only used for us when we're there. We have things like team coaches for away travel. There's travel to all of the games for the fans, whether they're at home or away. So I think it would be very useful for us to do it. But I've got a request for Joe here, since you're working with the council and they are the people who own the stadium. I would request that the council asks everybody who actually, all organizations who use their buildings, to actually do this carbon footprint. Otherwise, I don't know if I can persuade them to do it. The other thing is that we are actually a community club. I don't know if you know anything about the struggle we had when we had a dodgy owner, but now we're owned by 5 owners. One is the football fans, but the other 4 are people who are local, who care for the club, and they all have their own businesses. So that's just another side thing. We have sponsors who have their own businesses. I doubt whether, well, I don't know. I suppose we could ask them because they're sort of suppliers. We have products that we produce for the fans. So whoever produces those, I'd love to see that done, because I don't like buying anything to support the club except for a cotton bag, because everything else isn't cotton. I mean, the t-shirts have synthetic stuff, things like that. I'm very aware that there is one club in the country that actually does this brilliantly, which is Forest Green Rovers. You will know all about it. I'm a great, I mean, I follow everything he does. I follow him on social media. I miss going there. I used to love going to away matches because Stroud is the greenest place I've ever been. It is wonderful. I mean, sorry, this is a little diversion, but one day I went in to get a lottery ticket in just an ordinary newsagent's after the match in Stroud. And I sort of said, there was a bit of waste paper involved with the ticket, because I checked it, and I said, if you just put this in the waste, I'll take it home to recycle. And he said, oh, we recycle everything. That was just an ordinary newsagent. I was knocked out. Anyway, so I'd like that. But the other people that we are responsible for, and we do write reports. We write reports for the charity commissioners. That is a big body. That wouldn't be just Joe asking them, because it's not Gateshead. But again, I mean, if somebody could make sure that they do it. And then we are part of Durham FA. So there's another body that needs to ask all of their people to do this. And well, funders. I mean, we also use places around Gateshead like community centres and a leisure centre, again owned by the council, to do things like walking football and the junior heat sessions. So there's an awful lot. It wouldn't be just us, and I'm sure that's the case with any business, but because we don't actually own our building, I think the first thing that people are going to think is, oh, it's not down to us. The only success I've really had so far is we very rarely have balloons at games, luckily, but there was a big one once and somebody brought some, and I tracked down as many as I could and burst them and took the scraps home and explained to parents why I was doing it. And then I discovered from the stewards, and in fact, balloons are not allowed on any gated properties. So I've been able to flag that up for people at the club. So it's not just me, the weirdo, complaining. One of our biggest fans is actually an RSPB warden. He used to work on the Farne Islands, and now he's at the Isle of May. And so I've always got him to fall back on for things like, why not balloons? But this is just bigger than balloons, isn't it? So I would need some backup on this, Joe. So,
well, all I would say is Gateshead Council are measuring the carbon footprint of all their buildings. So it's likely that they're already covering that, and they're working with SmartCarbon. They have a platform, and they're trying to measure their carbon footprint as best as possible.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question though, Emily, because actually that your use of electricity while those games are going on will actually fall into Gateshead's scope 3 electricity use, because you have got operational control of that. At the end of the day, you're turning. So I think that's a conversation for us to have with Gateshead anyway, about how that is being measured, and maybe we've got our lead consultant working with them on it. So I think there's probably a question to ask there in terms of how that electricity is going to be recorded.
Yeah, I don't know if they segregate it at the minute. I think they just cover all the bills for all the buildings and like all the leisure centres and everything like that, and all the community centres and things. So
yeah,
but yeah, it's interesting.
It is.
Brilliant. Well, I'm gonna put my last slide on only because I can. Oh, she says overconfidently. On current slide. Right, just to draw it to a close and just to highlight that we have 3 other webinars available to book on if you haven't already, and also just to highlight these one-to-one sessions that are available, especially Emily, just to, if you want to flag them up with all your partner organisations, because it is it can be adaptable. So if they just want to train the management team or have a chat about what it is they're doing and how they can fit in with what Gateshead Council are doing, or it can be as adaptable as you like it to be. So it's just something to note. But anyway, thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at some of the next ones. And thank you, Lee, again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, that's cool. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has announced that an online application system is being set up to help Ukrainians with passports gain entry to the UK. The aim is to speed up the process for people who want to join close relatives already here. The move follows criticism from some MPs and the Ukrainian government that the British authorities were being too slow to help refugees.
Here's our next one.
The decision to allow Ukrainians with a passport to apply online for a visa to join family members in the UK is significant. It means that from next week, many refugees escaping the war and heading to Britain will not have to go to a visa application centre or VAC. Allowing them to complete biometric tests in the UK after they arrive will reduce the pressure on stretched facilities in Poland, Hungary and elsewhere in Europe. However, the new rules